Welcome to a rebroadcast of a unique talk on Abdu'l-Baha, Master of Social Action and Public Discourse, by Paul Hanley on Friday, May 7th. Those who heard it wished they to rehear it, and those who knew they were going to miss it asked us to record it. And so we have, and here we're able to rebroadcast it. Abdu'l-Baha, the Master of Social Action and Public Discourse. Among his many areas of service to humanity, Abdu'l-Baha initiated remarkable social and economic projects that even today would be at the forefront of community and agriculture development initiatives. Similarly, his public discourse, which occurred 100 years ago, remains transformational in its content on innumerable topics, still at the forefront of contemporary discourse. In all things, he is our exemplar. This presentation features a number of his accomplishments in these areas, focusing particularly on Adesiya, the model agricultural village established by the Master in the early 20th century, situated southeast of the Sea of Galilee and south of the River Yarmouk, at the north end of the Jordan River, very close to the current border between Israel and Jordan. And the presenter today, Paul Hanley, is a distinguished Baha'i author who recently moved to Molokai, island of the Hawaiian Islands, but he hails from Canada. Paul Hanley has published 5 books and 1,600 articles on the environment, sustainable development, agriculture, and other topics. And he's the editor of a number of things as well. His book 11 received the 2015 University of Saskatchewan's President's Award for Nonfiction and the 2015 Association for Baha'i Studies Award for Distinguished Scholarship. Paul Hanley's biography, Man of the Trees, Richard St. Barbie Baker, the first global conservationist, has a foreword by His Royal Highness Prince Charles and an introduction by James Goodall. Paul's latest book is Richard St. Barbie Baker, Child of the Trees, and it's part of a Changemaker series focused or directed to junior youth. Paul is a recipient of many awards: the Canadian Environment Award, the Meewasin Conservation Award, the Organic Connections Pioneer Organic Communicator Award, the Saskatchewan Sustainability Award, and most recently, in 2020, Paul received the Food System 2050 Vision Prize from the Rockefeller Foundation for a food system vision for the Canadian prairies. It has a name in the indigenous language, which I can't pronounce. With that, I'd like to present Paul Hanley giving this talk, Abdu'l-Baha, the Master of Social Action and Public Discourse. Let's welcome Paul.
Thanks very much, Molly. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I see a number of familiar faces. I even think I saw a couple of living rooms that I've been in when you were introducing yourselves. And I look forward to meeting lots of you in the future when we can do things like travel around freely again. I guess it's coming. And Yeah, I'm very happy to be sharing with you some things you might not know about Abdu'l-Baha, who was the son of Baha'u'llah, the head of the Baha'i faith for many years. And it's this year we're marking the 100th anniversary of the passing of Abdu'l-Baha. He passed away in November of 1921, so 100 years ago, after a very remarkable life. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. I'm just going to share my screen now so we can see the slideshow. There we go. So I want to focus in about this idea of engagement in social action and public discourse. And this is something that I think Abdu'l-Baha was the master of. Now, Abdu'l-Baha actually means the servant of Baha'u'llah, the servant of the glory. But his father, Baha'u'llah, called him the master. So I just thought it was interesting that he had that title, and his work in this area is really quite interesting. But before I get into that, I just want to sort of give a little bit of context about why we need social action and why we need to become engaged in public discourse. So I think that we really see today in the world kind of a rise of all kinds of really dramatic problems that are affecting the whole planet. And Baha'u'llah talked about this when he was alive. He lived in the 19th century, but he was already seeing the rise of these sort of series of global problems. And he said the signs of impending convulsions and chaos can now be discerned inasmuch as the prevailing order appeareth to be lamentably defective. So I think Baha'u'llah was pointing out that really it's the entire world order that is defective and needs to be changed. So thus the need for social action and really a profound public discourse about what kind of future we want. And he talked about his hope that humanity would arise to transform this defective order. And he beseeched God that he may graciously awaken the peoples of the earth, may grant that the end of their conduct may be profitable unto them, and aid them to accomplish that which beseemeth their station. And just going back here, I just wanted to just share this picture. This looks to me, when I see this, it looks like some kind of a horror movie, apocalypse movie, but it's an actual situation in Damascus in Syria during the crisis there. So just one of the signs of this kind of chaos that Baha'u'llah talked about. But he talked about the need for transformative change. So not just reform of the system, but really a complete transformation of the system. And he said that the object of every revelation, these manifestations of God come to us from time to time, and the object of their revelations is to effect a transformation in the whole character of mankind, a transformation that shall manifest itself both outwardly and inwardly, that shall affect both its inner life and external conditions. So how do you bring about that type of profound transformation? What are some of the steps involved? Well, I think we'd agree that, if you're looking for a transformation of the whole world order, you need a systematic plan. And you need really to involve change at the individual level. We each need to really look at how we can change and make a better contribution to the world than maybe we have in the past. We need our communities to change, but we also need our institutions to change. For example, our institutions of governance. So we need, in a sense, three sets of protagonists to become involved in this plan for change, to bring about change. And we also need three areas of action. One, I think, is really just to build the capacities that we need for transforming ourselves and for transforming our institutions and communities. And then, as we build this capacity, we gain, I guess, more ability to really start engaging in direct social action, things that will actually bring about profound changes in our communities, our regions, our nations, and also to become very adept at public discourse. So how can we influence people through words, and how can we share words and convincing arguments about the type of future that we really need to move towards? And so the Baha'i community and our way, I guess, of getting involved in this is really engaging in this set of core activities at the level of the neighborhood and the village, activities that build unity and capacity. Things like these devotional meetings where people of all faiths can come together and pray together and build a sense of spiritual unity. And this capacity building through prayer, devotions, and through educational processes that involve children, youth, and adults, um, they really paved the way for effective social action, just beginning on a small scale in our communities. And as we move forward, we learn from them, we can become more and more effective and bring about change on larger scale. And also becoming engaged in public discourse. So how can we shift our thinking and build a sense of hope in the world, that the world can be better and we can solve our problems? So, and the Universal House of Justice, the head of the Baha'i Faith, talked about this process that they have framed around the world and communities around the world, having the potential to disable every instrument devised by humanity over the long period of its childhood for one group to oppress another. So imagine that, to eliminate oppression of all kinds, whether it's racism or sexism, nationalism, classism, and eliminate those. So this is what this process aims to do. And the master of that process is Abdu'l-Bahá. And in the Baha'i faith, they talk about Abdu'l-Bahá being our example, our exemplar. And we try to model ourselves on him. So he was really a master of this process of building capacity in people and communities and institutions, engaging in discourse to change people's thinking and values, and also in direct social action. So just about this idea of his involvement in public discourse, uh, he is said to have written 30,000 tablets. So basically a tablet is a letter. And some of these were just simple letters to friends and so on. But most of them were really profound documents which really lay out a whole vision of the future and a means of bringing about social change. And I looked at this 30,000 tablets, and we were saying, Molly mentioned that I was a writer and I'd written 1,500 articles over a 27-year period. And I thought, oh, that's pretty good. But really 30,000 tablets just kind of blows that away. And it would take, I figured this out, it would take one article like I wrote every day for 82 years to match Abdu'l-Bahá's output. But the amazing thing was that this is just a fraction of what he did. He also toured through Europe and through North America, engaging in verbal discourse on his international travels, and was actually, this happened in around, I think, 1912 to 1914, and he became a sensation. Newspaper headlines, front pages were filled with stories about his talks. He had this huge impact on people, affecting hundreds of thousands of people through his travels, and really establishing the Baha'i faith in the West. But he was also a master of social action. And it's quite remarkable what he was able to accomplish in his lifetime in this area. And this is mostly what I'll talk about today. He was called right down to the micro level. He lived in Palestine, which is now Israel, in the city of Akka and also in Haifa. And people called him the Lord of Generosity. And these were his personal activities and his day-to-day activities, among all the other things he was doing, involved going out into the community and helping people very, very directly. And someone said about him, he goes about doing good, and Mohammedans and Christians alike share his benefactions. From sunrise until midnight, he works, in spite of broken health, never sparing himself if there is a wrong to be righted who are suffering to be relieved. Meanwhile, he was originally from Iran. He was exiled to Israel from Iran. And in Iran, he was very engaged in social action. He set up, encouraged the Baha'is to set up schools and medical facilities and promoted the role of women in the community. And interestingly, Baha'i women achieved 100% literacy compared to the general population of 25%. And even today, only about 80% of Iranian women are literate, and Baha'is are 100% literate. And interestingly, through all of this, he was an exile and a prisoner, just doing all of these things until I think 1908, he was in prison. So he was in prison because of his advocacy of his father's work, the Baha'i faith. And often, as you know, the manifestations of the great teachers like Jesus were often hated by the authorities, and the same happened with Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha. So from the age of 9 to 64, he was a prisoner, and most of the time under a threat of execution. So it's amazing that he was able to do this. Another thing he did was receive all the Baha'i pilgrims from around the world, and often he'd actually cook for them himself. So he was kind of like a almost superhuman. Meanwhile, he was doing things like building the shrine of the Bab and administering a world religion. So just a really, really extraordinary human being. So I wanted to talk about some remarkable, sustainable, regenerative, social economic development programs that he created. And one is in a community in Jordan called Adesiya. And I'm mostly basing this on an article written by a man named Raj Pushti, an Iranian agriculturalist who wrote this wonderful article about Abdu'l-Baha's project in this village. Now, this village of Adesiya is now in Jordan. I guess it would have been considered in Palestine at the time. And it's very close to the Sea of Galilee. In this circle area, you can see where it is. And so in 1901, Abdu'l-Baha purchased the lands of Adesiya as a whole village, paying 400 Turkish gold lira. The original area purchase was 920 hectares, and a hectare is, let's say it's close to 2 acres. However, Abdu'l-Baha immediately gave away 230 hectares, leaving a total of 690. The village was developed in several phases. At first, Abdu'l-Baha made arrangements for several farmers to begin the work, but they found it very difficult due to the poor conditions of the land and the heavy labor required. What's more, they were subject to raids by thieves who stole whatever meager crops they were able to produce. In 1907, recognizing these obstacles, Abdu'l-Baha contacted the Baha'is in Persia and asked them to send experienced farmers to settle in Adesiya. Interestingly, I discovered that there's an Israeli researcher named Shea Rosen, and he recently did a presentation where he has investigated Adesiya, this Baha'i village in Jordan, and 3 other villages that the Baha'is had. And he shared this quotation from the writings of Baha'u'llah, where Baha'u'llah actually directly blessed these. He talked about the delicate, to dedicate the rich and sacred territories adjoining the Jordan in its vicinity to the worship and service of the one true God. So actually Baha'u'llah himself endorsed these projects. So Abdu'l-Baha brought these farmers from Iran, but he was very transparent, and it wasn't very encouraging what he told them. So over the next couple of years, a group of farmers from around the Yazd area in Persia began to arrive and commenced farm operations. Abdu'l-Baha informed the farmers that they were coming to one of the most inhospitable places on earth. In the Jordan Valley, the heat was stifling from June to September, with average daily temperatures around 38 degrees Celsius. which is close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Malaria was a significant problem. While the land had once been fertile and supported a large population, agriculture in the region had fallen into decline under Ottoman rule. Abdu'l-Baha had told them that God would gradually make the climate of Adesiya more comfortable, merely for the sake of the Baha'i farmers from Iran. These farmers would overcome many obstacles to implement the projects planned and directed by Abdu'l-Baha. At first, hand labor with simple tools were used to prepare the land, but gradually draft animals and plows were added. They also had to build homes to provide for the basic needs of their families, and these and other buildings were initially made from mud bricks. Before the farmers started cultivation, Abdu'l-Baha instructed them to meet, consult, and then to divide the land among themselves. So this is a picture of some of the people that lived in Adesiya. Gradually, life did begin to improve and the friends began to prosper. Precipitation was sufficient to support rain-fed grain production, and Abdu'l-Baha recommended that the farmers begin by planting wheat and barley. Often the farmers visited Haifa or Akka to seek Abdu'l-Baha's advice. He would make a specific recommendation for that season, assuring them of a bumper harvest and great bounty. An important characteristic of the Jordan Valley is a year-round growing season, making double cropping feasible. Over time, the farmers were able to become quite productive and to produce surplus grain. Although some raiding continued to occur, security was improved by building bonds of friendship in the wider community, an activity Abdu'l-Baha insisted on. Now, actually, Abdu'l-Baha had a plan in mind from the very beginning. And during the First World War, which started in 1914, when drought conditions added to the disruptions caused by the fighting, Abdu'l-Baha foresaw famine. He went to the farmers in Adesiya and asked them to empty their granaries, accepting the amounts needed for their own use and for reseeding. He also asked them to purchase grain from farmers in the area. A train of 200 camels was dispatched to Haifa and Akka, where the grain was distributed among the local population, preventing starvation. This humanitarian effort earned Abdu'l-Baha the title of Knight by the British Empire, they had gained control of Palestine during the war. He accepted the honor as a gift of a just king, but never used the title. And this is actually a picture of him at the ceremony where he was knighted. So the farmers' initial success opened new horizons. Abdu'l-Baha encouraged them to diversify their crops. And as early as 1910, they expanded into vegetable production for the families and for the market. Next, Abdu'l-Baha encouraged the farmers to add fruit trees. It was customary to plant broad beans between them and around pomegranate trees. Some were used fresh or dried for human consumption, but a large part of the crop was plowed into the soil while still green to improve soil texture and fertility. Abdu'l-Baha also introduced bananas to the region. Until that time, no one in the region knew anything about this crop, let alone how to grow it. At first, the villagers were even more unsure how to eat it, finding it quite unpalatable and hard to swallow, until they were shown that the outer skin had to be removed. Within a few years, many farmers in the region were growing bananas and profited greatly from this relatively lucrative business. Gradually, Abdu'l-Baha's predictions of improving conditions came true. In the early years, malaria was rampant. Some of the Baha'is developed the disease and even succumbed to it. To address the problem, Abdu'l-Baha instructed the community to plant a certain type of eucalyptus around the lagoon in the middle of Adesiya. This variety produces quinine in its leaves and branches, which acts as a deterrent to the malarial parasite. The trees grew quickly, sucking up large quantities of the mosquito-infested water. Along with the diversification of crops, Abdu'l-Baha encouraged additional methods to improve the productivity and sustainability of the farms, such as crop rotation. In addition to the use of nitrogen-fixing legumes in rotation, manure was added to increase the yield of crops. Abdu'l-Baha encouraged the friends in Adesiya to diversify into livestock. The Baha'i farmers were almost self-sufficient in terms of their own food. However, Abdu'l-Baha advised them to increase their income by selling products in markets beyond the immediate boundaries of Jordan. Later, he introduced irrigation, tractors, and electric lighting, and encouraged people to engage in crafts and small industries. And many of the women engaged in needlework, dressmaking, and millinery, and the men became part-time carpenters. Again, here we have some of the friends in Adesiya. So also, Abdu'l-Baha really worked on this idea of capacity building. And along with gradually improving farming conditions, Abdu'l-Baha encouraged spiritual and social aspects of village life. Problems as such relating to tenancy, transfer of the right of production, and share of irrigation water, as well as interpersonal conflicts, are bound to arise in any village setting. When the Baha'i farmers sought Abdu'l-Baha's advice regarding these matters, he would smile and suggest that they should sit down and pray together, consult on the resolution of the problem, and ensure that the unity of the community was maintained no matter what. The conditions of peasants and sharecroppers in the 19th century Jordan under Ottoman rule were wretched. The peasantry was liable to rapacious profiteering by landlords. But Adesiya was different. The system of crop and animal production was based on a special type of sharecropping tendency that was both innovative and fair. Abdu'l-Baha emphasized the application of moral and spiritual principles in day-to-day life and farm work. These values had a significant influence on the production and marketing systems of the farmers. And they were able to establish strong and warm bonds of friendship with the people they met or had business dealings with, and conduct their affairs with a high rectitude of conduct. And this is the Hazrat al-Quds, or the Baha'i center, administrative center of the town of Adesiya in the 1940s. So a very well-developed community by this stage. At its peak, Adesiya had around 1,000 people in the village and surrounding area. The first spiritual assembly of the Baha'is of Adesiya was elected in 1924 to direct the affairs of the community. And they built in 1931 a two-story building as a community administrative center. In the early days, the education of children took place at home. In the evenings, the Baha'is, irrespective of age, attended literacy classes. Adesiya soon became an agricultural showpiece for the whole of Jordan. If the government wished to show how advanced it was in agricultural production and farming, it would bring foreign guests and dignitaries to Adesiya, a brilliant star in an otherwise semi-arid scrubland. Even members of the royal family visited the village. Ultimately, due to Jordanian land reforms in the 1960s, the Baha'is were not able to continue to live in Adesiya and moved to other areas, even other countries, to support worldwide growth of the Baha'i faith. I mentioned Shea Rosen, who had done he's not a Baha'i, but he had investigated the Baha'i involvement in Jordan. And interestingly, he talked about the influence of the Baha'i communities on the kibbutz movement in Israel. I don't know if you know about the kibbutz, but they were cooperative farms started by a Jewish youth. And they had a whole vision of what life could be like in Israel. And the Baha'is were actually their neighbors and some of these early kibbutzes. And this is a description of a visit of one of the kibbutz Ein Gav kibbutz members went to Adesiya in 1941. And you can see what they said about it. The entrance of the village is a beautiful boulevard through which are seen the various fruit trees, gardens, and beautiful vineyards. Most of the land is planted with gardens, an orchard of pomegranates of various varieties. And so they go on and describe all the different crops that are there. We saw bananas standing in water 1/2 meter high. And so you get a real sense of how beautiful they had made Adesiya. And it talks about the foundation of their religion being horticulture. Talk about work as an ideal. Reminded us quite a bit of Aaron David Gordon, who is one of the founders of kibbutzism. And so we visited their club, which is the Hazrat al-Quds. a wonderful building surrounded by gardens and fruit trees. It's difficult to describe that in such a remote corner there is such wealth and beauty. So you can see from their observations how much this village had developed. And Abdu'l-Baha, he came to the Haifa Akka area as a prisoner and an exile. Everybody hated the Baha'is at first, but you can see how he gradually, through this behavior, won over the community. And when he died in 1921, 10,000 people attended his funeral. So an amazing impact that he had. And today, just outside of Akka, this is the shrine to Abdu'l-Baha that's being built. So this really, really remarkable architectural design, and it's now under construction to commemorate the life of this wonderful human being. So I think that Adesiya, although it was in the 20th century, the early 20th century, is really still an example for our times. The village provided ecological and climate services. With the encouragement of Abdu'l-Baha, the community restored degraded, eroded, and deforested land, improved soil quality, improved water use efficiency, and increased crop diversity, including the use of perennial tree crops and forages. Today, this approach, which requires minimal external inputs, is known as agroecology, an effort to farm in a manner that mimics the functions of natural ecosystems. It also really developed methods of social economic development that we need today. The initial capital investment by Abdu'l-Baha was the catalyst that allowed families in Adesiya to prosper. They were able to transform scrubland into productive farms that eventually supported hundreds of residents and contributed to the local and regional economy. The farm provided high quality food for the village and urban areas. The generous sharecropping arrangements and profit sharing improved the standard of living of residents and non-resident farm laborers. And also, Abdu'l-Baha was building capacity in people, including their moral capacity. Material self-reliance brings a sense of dignity. Abdu'l-Baha went further, encouraging the residents of Adesiya to pay equal attention to their moral development. This was achieved through education, both material and spiritual, for the children, youth, and adults, and through regular devotional meetings. Education supported a dual moral purpose: to develop the potentialities of the individual and to enhance their capacity to be of service. Building this capacity helped community members to live harmoniously. A local governing institution was elected to administer the material and spiritual needs of the community. In this way, the moral capacity of the individual, the community, and institutions increased. So this is exactly what's needed for village development today all over the world. And it's interesting that, we don't really think about this, but farming remains the largest single occupation today in the world. And 1/3 of humanity, some 2 billion farmers and their families, derive their livelihood from agriculture still today. There are 500 million farms worldwide. 200 million people are pastoralists, they're involved in grazing animals. And there are 450 million farm laborers. And many, many people still derive subsistence from forests, including 60 million indigenous people. Another 58 million people engaged in fisheries and agriculture, and 800 million people involved in urban and peri-urban food production. So you can see that agriculture still is kind of the central economic activity of the world. So it's very important to develop systems of agricultural sustainability and equity at the level of villages. And agroecology, like Abdu'l-Baha established in Adesiya, is very effective in boosting productivity and increasing sustainability of crops. Now, the potential to restore the ecosphere, just as Abdu'l-Baha did in the area of Adesiya, which had turned into scrubland, is huge. About 3.5 billion hectares of land, which is about the size of Africa, is degraded in the world today. And if we could as Abdu'l-Baha did, support the rural poor to restore the land. This would eliminate extreme poverty and hunger, because almost all of the extremely poor today are rural smallholder farmers. It would increase the world's biocapacity. That's its ability to, for example, produce oxygen, produce ecosystem services, produce food, and so on. And it would help to ameliorate climate change, because one of the best ways to deal with climate change is to increase soil organic carbon, take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and turn it into carbon in the soil. And it will also help to avoid this massive problem of mass migrations and situations like we see in many parts of the world, in Syria, Northern Africa, and so on, where people are forced to leave their homes because of environmental and social problems. And restoring this ecosphere, this amount of land, 3.5 billion acres, would almost be like creating a new continent in the world. So following in the footsteps of the master, Abdu'l-Baha, many Baha'is have become engaged in agricultural projects. And I'll just tell you just about a few of them before we end. And this goes back a long way. It was mentioned that I've written a book about Richard St. Barr Baker, who was called the Man of the Trees. And he began projects very similar to what Abdu'l-Baha did in Nigeria and Benin in the 1920s. And here he is out in a village discussing and consulting with the headman and the villagers in the village about how they could improve their agricultural systems, which were under threat from climate change in the region and influx of foreign companies deforesting their area. And he established an organization called the Men of the Trees, which was one of the first international environmental non-governmental organizations, today called the International Tree Foundation, still working, planting. There's a ticker at the top there. It says they've planted 805,000 trees in 2020, mostly in Kenya and other parts of Africa. In Colombia and in Central America and Latin America in general, Fundayak is a Baha'i-inspired organization that's helping to build agricultural sustainable ventures in Latin America. And they've educated more than 20,000 students on these methods of community development at the village level. In Colombia here, the University Center for Rural Wellbeing, building experimental plots, encouraging people to develop agroecology at the village level. And in India, started in 1985, the Barley Development Institute for Rural Women. It's trained over 7,000 women now from 600 villages in a kind of new methods of ensuring village sustainability and prosperity. And in Nepal, the community working on finding ways for farm workers who were displaced by COVID to find ways to obtain land and improve their livelihoods and ecosystems. And this is also being done in many communities in industrialized countries as well, where people are adopting this practice of starting gardens at their Baha'i centers and in parks and so on, and engaging with people in the community, building bonds of friendship and cooperation, using agriculture as also a way of working with children and youth and encouraging them to learn these skills. Projects like coral restoration in Fiji that Baha'is are engaged in, and whole watershed projects to restore coral reefs and build sustainable food systems. In Haiti, the Smallholder Farmers Alliance, created by Baha'is, involved in planting agro-farms, agroforestry. They planted millions of trees, improved people's livelihoods, and 13,000 farmers and their family members positively impacted by this project, inspired by Abdu'l-Baha's work and by the work of Richard St. Barr Baker. And in Colombia is another one at the new local house of worship in Colombia. When the friends there were building it, they also decided to reestablish a traditional native food forest around the temple. So that's, I hope I didn't go on too long. I think it's kind of an interesting story that many people don't know about. This is just a link to the article by Raj Pushti, which tells you all about it. And also there's this article, which I wrote, Begin with a Village, which is on Bahá'í World, the Bahá'í World website, which also tells this story and this whole issue of rebuilding rural communities and villages and so on, along the lines that Abdu'l-Baha shared. So that is it, and I would encourage your comments, questions. Thank you.